The King of Pop did something no one expected. In the middle of a sold-out concert, with tens of thousands of eyes fixed on him, Michael Jackson brought the music to a halt. The band froze, the dancers stilled, and the arena fell into an uneasy silence. At first, fans thought it might be part of the show, one of Michael's dramatic pauses that always kept people guessing. But this was different. This wasn't planned. Michael was searching for something, or someone. What could possibly make the most electrifying performer in the world stop everything at the height of his own concert? The crowd held its breath, waiting for a cue, waiting for the beat to drop again, but it didn't. Instead, Michael scanned the sea of faces, his eyes narrowing, his head tilting, as though he'd just heard something no one else had, a sound hidden in the storm of screams. A voice. Questions raced through every mind in that moment. Who was it? What could be powerful enough to capture Michael's attention in the middle of his performance? Was it a heckler, someone daring to interrupt him, or something far more extraordinary? The audience could only watch as Michael leaned toward the edge of the stage, listening, refusing to move on until he found the source. Time seemed to stretch. 10 seconds felt like a minute. The tension was unbearable. Fans had come for music, for spectacle, but instead they were watching a mystery unfold. And deep down, everyone sensed this was not just a pause. It was the beginning of something unforgettable, because in that silence, under the burning lights, the King of Pop wasn't just searching for a sound. He was about to create a moment that would live forever. A single choice, a risk that could have descended into chaos, was about to transform into one of the most legendary duets the world had ever seen. And yet, in that instant, nobody knew what would happen next. The night had started like every Michael Jackson concert, electric, feverish, alive. From the moment the gates opened, waves of fans surged into the arena, clutching posters, cameras, and the kind of raw anticipation that only Michael could summon. Chants echoed through the corridors long before the first note played, thousands of voices uniting in his name, as though the entire building was a living organism beating to one rhythm. When the lights finally dimmed and the first burst of sound roared through the speakers, the crowd erupted into chaos. Michael stepped into view, a silhouette against the blaze of spotlights, and the atmosphere shifted into something otherworldly. For a few minutes, everything felt like it always did. Seamless, polished, larger than life. The audience was swept into the tide of his voice, his movement, his energy. Each song hit like a wave crashing against the shore, leaving fans breathless, overwhelmed, intoxicated by the spectacle. And yet, even in that perfection, something unexpected was brewing. Because just as the show seemed untouchable, just as Michael's control over the stage appeared absolute, a disruption occurred. Not the kind that breaks a performance, but the kind that rewrites it. In the middle of a song, at the very moment the energy should have soared, Michael froze. He stopped singing. He stopped dancing. And in an instant, the concert that had felt unstoppable suddenly teetered on the edge of uncertainty. The silence that followed was heavier than the music itself. Fans shifted in their seats, uncertain whether to cheer or wait. Was this part of the act? A dramatic pause to set up a bigger moment? Or was something wrong? Michael was notorious for perfection, for never letting a mistake slip through. To see him halt so suddenly was shocking, almost frightening. And then came the realization. This wasn't about technical issues. It wasn't about choreography. This was about something only Michael had noticed. Something hidden in the chaos. A voice that didn't belong to the band, the backing tracks, or the rehearsed routine. Something raw, real, and unplanned. In the middle of the spectacle, Michael was listening for something that no one else yet understood. And the crowd leaned in unknowingly toward history. At first, no one could make sense of it. The air was still ringing with echoes of the last chorus when Michael tilted his head, raised his hand, and seemed to hush the stadium. The band looked at one another, unsure whether to keep playing or wait for a signal. The dancers froze mid-step, glancing nervously at their leader. And the fans, tens of thousands of them, fell into a strange, confused quiet. That's when it happened. Through the silence, a voice carried. Not a heckle, not a scream of adoration, but a note. Strong, clear, and hauntingly familiar. Someone in the crowd was singing. And not just singing, they were matching Michael. The pitch was nearly perfect, the tone so startlingly close that it seemed like an echo. Gasps rippled through the audience as people turned toward the source. Who could possibly sound so much like him? Who had the audacity to sing during his concert? For a split second, the moment teetered between awe and disbelief. It could have been dismissed, ignored, drowned out by the next beat. But Michael didn't move on. He leaned in. He listened. He wanted to know. The tension mounted. Security began scanning the stands, the spotlight operators unsure if they should track the sound. Fans whispered, pointing, speculating. Was it a trained singer, a lucky coincidence, or something else entirely? The arena was caught between fear that the concert had derailed and hope that they were about to witness something extraordinary. Michael's expression told the truth before his words did. This wasn't annoyance. This wasn't anger. This was fascination. He had heard something rare, and he wasn't about to let it go. Instead of carrying on, instead of letting the show roll forward, he made a decision that would stun everyone in the building. In a single gesture, Michael Jackson chose to turn away from the safety of his rehearsed perfection and toward the unknown. The band's final chord lingered in the air when Michael did the unthinkable. He raised his hand, palm outward, and everything stopped. The music died mid-beat. The dancers froze, caught between movement and stillness. Even the lights seemed to hesitate. An uneasy silence spread across the arena, so vast it felt like the building itself was holding its breath. For a moment, no one understood what had happened. Was it planned? A technical failure? Or something worse? Fans leaned toward one another, whispering nervously. Some tried to laugh it off. Michael was a master of theatrics, after all. But this pause was different. It stretched on longer than any dramatic flourish ever had. Seconds passed like minutes, the tension climbing higher with each tick of the clock. The crowd of thousands, usually deafening, now sounded like a restless ocean, small waves of murmurs and shouts breaking against the silence. Security crews shifted uneasily near the stage, waiting for a cue. The band members exchanged looks of confusion, their instruments ready, but their leader unmoving. And there stood Michael, his body still, his gaze scanning the darkness beyond the blinding lights. He wasn't panicked. He wasn't angry. He was listening. Everyone could feel it, his focus, his intensity. What had caught his attention so completely that he would abandon the perfection of his performance? No one knew. And yet the answer was out there in the crowd, hidden among the thousands of voices waiting to be found. The stillness grew heavier, unbearable. Every fan, every musician, every guard in that building waited for Michael to act. And then, with the entire world watching, he called out into the darkness. The silence shattered as Michael's voice echoed through the stadium, commanding yet curious. He gestured with one hand, pointing into the distance, signaling security to move. Spotlights flickered across the stands, searching. The crowd, buzzing with confusion a moment earlier, now roared with anticipation. Who was he looking for? What had he heard? Then it happened. One of the beams of light landed on a figure standing frozen among the sea of fans. A young face, half hidden in shock, eyes wide, hands trembling against their chest. The crowd gasped as the spotlight fixed firmly on them, as though destiny itself had chosen the stranger. For a moment, the singer seemed paralyzed. Their lips moved, but no sound came out now. Fear and disbelief warred on their face. What began as a single act of courage, a voice that dared to rise against the roar of thousands, was now exposed for all to see. And standing on that stage, Michael Jackson was watching only them. The crowd's reaction swelled from murmurs into thunder. Some cheered wildly, others shouted in disbelief, and still others clutched their friends, knowing they were witnessing something impossible. The energy shifted again, teetering on the edge of chaos and glory. Michael extended his arm, motioning with an unmistakable invitation. The stranger hesitated, feet rooted to the spot, the weight of a lifetime of anonymity pressing down. But security began guiding them forward, through the sea of hands and flashing cameras, toward the stage where history waited. And yet, even as the crowd screamed in excitement, one thought pulsed louder than the rest. No one knew if this brave stranger could actually deliver. The arena trembled with energy as the young singer was lifted onto the stage. Michael stepped forward, smiling softly, his presence both calming and overwhelming. The fans' knees shook, their voice caught in their throat, yet when Michael reached out his hand, the fear eased just enough. A single handshake bridged the gap between dream and reality, between ordinary life and the impossible. Michael leaned in, speaking words no one else could hear, offering reassurance with a nod. Then, with gentle insistence, he placed the microphone in the trembling hands of the stranger. The crowd erupted, their anticipation crashing like a tidal wave. The fans swallowed hard, eyes locked on Michael, as though drawing strength from him alone. The music began again, softly this time, stripped down to its essence. Michael sang the opening line, his voice soaring, unmistakable, flawless. Then he turned, tilting the microphone toward the stranger. The arena held its breath. And in that fragile moment, the first note emerged. It wasn't perfect. It wasn't polished. But it was raw, powerful, and achingly sincere. The crowd gasped, then erupted in cheers as the two voices intertwined. What began as hesitation transformed into harmony. The fear melted into something braver, stronger, until the duet swelled into a sound that filled every corner of the stadium. Michael smiled, stepping back slightly, letting the fans shine beside him. The image was unforgettable, the king of pop sharing his stage, not as a ruler above his subjects, but as a partner in song. The harmony wasn't just in their voices, it was in the connection, the shared humanity that rippled through the crowd. Tears streamed down faces. Strangers hugged one another. Cameras shook in trembling hands, trying to capture what their hearts could barely process. It was more than music. It was a reminder of what courage could become when met with grace, and what happened next made history. The first chorus shook the building like a tidal wave. Michael's voice soared, strong and unmistakable. But what electrified the audience was how seamlessly it blended with the trembling tones of the fan beside him. What began as fragile courage quickly blossomed into something extraordinary. Each note the stranger sang grew steadier, bolder, until the sound filled the stadium with a raw, unfiltered power. The audience could hardly believe it. They weren't just witnessing a concert anymore. They were watching destiny unfold. Phones flashed like starlight, camera bulbs exploding as people tried to freeze the moment in time. Tears ran down cheeks, arms waved in the air, and the entire arena pulsed with an energy that defied description. Some fans clasped their hands in disbelief, others pressed their palms to their hearts, unable to process the miracle before them. And Michael was transformed. You could see it in the way he leaned into the duet, not overshadowing but elevating. He fed off the courage of the fan, as though this moment had reignited something within him. His smile widened, his body moved with renewed fire, and suddenly the stage became more than a platform. It became an altar to music's unifying power. Every lyric carried more weight than usual. Every harmony rang deeper. It was almost mythic, as though the fan had been chosen not by chance but by fate. The voices rose together, weaving a sound that wasn't rehearsed, wasn't polished, but was utterly unforgettable. And when the final notes of the song began to climb, the anticipation in the room reached its breaking point. Thousands stood on their feet, breath caught, waiting for the ending. The duet closed with a crescendo that rattled the soul. The arena erupted into chaos, shouts, tears, thunderous applause that seemed to shake the very earth. But the true surprise came after the final note. When the music ended, silence fell for a single heartbeat, as though time itself had paused to honor what had just occurred. Then, like a dam bursting, the arena exploded. The applause was deafening, chants of Michael's name mixing with screams for the stranger whose life had just been rewritten. Michael turned and without hesitation pulled the fan into an embrace. It wasn't staged, it wasn't forced, it was pure humanity, the world's greatest performer holding close the unknown voice that had dared to rise from the shadows. Cameras flashed wildly, capturing an image that would circle the globe, the king of pop sharing his spotlight. The emotional release was overwhelming. Strangers hugged one another in the stands. Parents lifted their children onto their shoulders, saying, "Remember this night." Tears streamed down faces that only moments earlier had been filled with anticipation. The performance had broken down barriers between artist and audience, between fame and anonymity, between dream and reality. The fan trembled still, clutching the microphone with both hands, hardly able to process what had happened. Yet standing there beside Michael, their eyes wide and glistening, they embodied every person in the audience who had ever wished for a chance, a voice, a moment of recognition. They were no longer just one among thousands. They were unforgettable. As the roar of the crowd shook the stadium, Michael lifted the fan's hand high into the air, signaling not just victory, but equality. The message was clear. Greatness could be shared. Magic didn't belong to one man. It lived in the courage to step forward and the willingness to listen. And though the concert could have ended there, with the crowd still trembling in disbelief, the story didn't end that night. In the days that followed, the world couldn't stop talking. Fans who had been there told their stories to anyone who would listen. Grainy recordings of the duet spread like wildfire, passed from hand to hand before finding their way onto television segments and newspaper articles. Headlines called it miraculous. Commentators described it as one of Michael's most unforgettable moments, not because of choreography or pyrotechnics, but because of his humanity. For the fan, life changed overnight. One day they were just another face in the crowd. The next, they were the voice that had shared the stage with the king of pop. Offers poured in. Interviews, invitations, a sudden flood of attention they had never dreamed of. And yet, what mattered most wasn't fame. It was the story. The memory of standing beside Michael, being lifted instead of dismissed, being heard instead of silenced. Fans around the world clung to that story. They saw in it a reflection of their own dreams, their own yearning to be noticed, to matter. And for Michael's legacy, it became another thread in the tapestry of his myth, an artist who could see beyond the blinding lights and into the heart of a single soul. Years passed, decades even, but the legend of that night lived on. Whenever fans spoke of Michael's concerts, this story would surface again and again. It was proof that magic wasn't always scripted. That greatness often appeared in the moments no one expected. And even now, decades later, people still ask the same haunting question: did Michael know something the rest of us didn't? The power of that night wasn't only in the music. It was in the silence that came before, the stillness that forced thousands to hold their breath, wondering what Michael had heard. It was in the choice he made, the choice to stop everything, to abandon perfection, to take a risk for something unknown. That single decision transformed a routine concert into legend. When the duet unfolded, it answered the question raised in that silence. Why did Michael stop? Because he believed in something greater than control. He believed music wasn't meant to be contained, rehearsed, or hoarded. It was meant to be shared. In that moment, he proved that a song could be bigger than the man who sang it. The beauty of it wasn't in flawless notes. It wasn't in precision or choreography. It was in rawness, in the courage of a trembling voice that dared to rise, and in Michael's willingness to step back and let that courage shine. He didn't need to dominate the stage. He chose to give it away, and in doing so, he gave everyone watching permission to imagine themselves in that spotlight, to believe that their voice might matter too. Critics would later marvel at how unscripted it was, how utterly spontaneous. There were no cues, no rehearsed lines. Even the band had been left in limbo, waiting for direction. But that was the miracle. Out of uncertainty came something pure. The duet wasn't planned, and that's why it resonated. It reminded people that even at the height of fame, in the middle of spectacle, there was room for humanity. The image of Michael leaning into the song, smiling at the stranger beside him, would be etched into memory. It wasn't just generosity, it was grace. A grace that said, "I see you. You matter. This stage isn't only mine." And as their voices climbed together, the message was impossible to miss. Greatness isn't about keeping the light to yourself. It's about knowing when to share it. That's why the moment became legend. Because it wasn't about perfection, it was about connection. It was about the courage of one fan, the openness of one artist, and the truth that music belongs to everyone. In the end, Michael didn't just give the world a performance. He gave them proof that magic lives in the unplanned, the ordinary transformed by grace. And that is why, even decades later, people still whisper about the night Michael Jackson stopped everything and gave the stage away. Looking back, that night was more than a duet. It was a reflection of who Michael was at his core. Behind the glitter, the fame, and the relentless spotlight, there was a man who understood that greatness is not measured by how much you take, but by how much you give. He gave his stage, his song, and for a brief moment his crown to someone unknown. And in doing so, he reminded us all of the power of generosity. For the fans who witnessed it, the story became a touchstone. They carried it with them, a reminder of how music can shatter barriers and unite strangers. For the fan who sang beside him, it was a life forever altered. But for Michael, it was something even deeper. It was proof that his mission as an artist, to heal, to inspire, to connect, could be fulfilled not only through spectacle, but through the simplest act of recognition. That night wasn't about choreography or lights. It wasn't about one man commanding a crowd. It was about what happens when courage meets opportunity, when talent hidden in the shadows is given the chance to shine. And perhaps most importantly, it was about us, all of us, realizing that the magic we revere doesn't live only in legends. It lives in the moments when we choose to step forward, and in the moments when someone chooses to listen. That is why the story endures. Because it wasn't just Michael's night. It was humanity's night. A night when music didn't separate the star from the crowd, but bound them together as one. Moments like this are why Michael will never be forgotten. If this story gave you chills, imagine the others still waiting to be told. Join me as we uncover more untold stories, more hidden moments, more glimpses of the king of pop that reveal the man behind the myth. Subscribe, leave a like, and keep watching, because the next story may just change the way you see Michael forever.